It's me again.
Oh, wow.
Do your parents actually watch these videos? No? Come on. I post them only for you guys in the Google Classroom. Welcome to another episode of Your Technologically Inept Foods Teacher. Here to bring you a little lesson on pastry making. Pastry is by far one of the hardest baked goods to do well. And often if you taste somebody's pie, it is so amazing. That person is an older person because they practiced their pastry method for so many years. Now, typically in my home, last night I made pastry in preparation for Thanksgiving. The nice thing about pastry is you can make it in advance. You can keep it in your fridge. In fact, it's a good idea to do that so that it's nice and chilled. Okay, I use my own recipe. I have a different recipe than this one that I use at home. I'm using this one here, Manny. So many. I love this ponytail, by the way. It's like the 80s again, a side ponytail. Okay. So at home, I use a different recipe because I like to use lard. Do you guys know what lard is?
Yeah.
So it's shortening is made out of vegetables, so that's what we're using. So this is a vegetable-based fat that you can use in pastries, but lard is pork fat. I find that lard gives you like the best, richest pie crust, really nice and flaky, turns nice and brown, and I just really like to use it for pastry. Now the first thing that we get going with pastry is our dry ingredients. So we're going to be doing a single crust recipe. So on the recipes up there, the recipe up there is a single crust, and I have a single crust on your recipe, so it's the recipe on the right, or on the left, I'm sorry. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I can get the lid off of my flour here, I'm going to measure out using a measuring cup, 1 cup of flour. Now, we're going to do tarts because the amount of time a pumpkin pie would actually take to bake would be quite long. And pumpkin pie, like many things like quiche, frittata, is thickened with eggs, right? It's usually got a lot of eggs in it. We're doing a mini pumpkin pie version, so I've got my leveled flour in there, okay? 7 mils of sugar. Sugar, where are you, sugar? I'm gonna need my cinnamon. Sugar, 7 mils of sugar. Sugar's just in there for caramelization. Caramelization is the browning due to sugars. So there's a 5 and a 2. Okay, we've got our sugar there. Now we're going to use our baking powder. Okay, so remember, keep these ones aside. The containers you use or touch at all, you keep aside because those are the containers that you have to sanitize and wipe the outside of. Rather than sanitizing them all, take out the ones you need, and then, or any ones you touch. All right, so then I had sugar, I need baking powder. Baking powder right here. So usually a short crust pastry recipe does contain a small amount of baking powder just to give it that additional puffing effect. So in this case it's 1 milliliter, which is a pretty small amount. I think I use like 5 mils at home in 5 cups of flour, so that sounds about right. Okay. The nice thing also about making pastry in advance is that you can freeze it. Pastry freezes beautifully, and then if you just have it ready to go in your freezer, you take it out the day before, you can use it and then just decide on what your filling is going to be. And you can fill it, you can shape it in like 1,000 different ways. So if I can only get the salt lid off, I'm going to add 1 mil of salt. Okay, 1 mil of salt. Okay, so these are my containers that I've now touched that I need to sanitize before moving on. Now, all right, so now here with my fork, I'm just going to combine my ingredients together. That's nice. So in terms of making pastry, we want our flour well combined. Great. Next part is we're going to put in our fat. Okay, so I'm using shortening because it's safe for everyone in my class and everybody can eat it. So if there's any non-pork people who don't consume pork, that's fine. This is safe for us all. So you can use anything. I do recommend either shortening or lard in pastry just because butter or margarine have a lower melting point and they tend to burn very fast. And they don't give you quite the same product. Now at first when you're cutting, you're using your pastry blender to cut your shortening. Now You want everything to be super cold, so we've had this shortening in the fridge all day. It's pre-measured for you guys, just because of all the COVID-related things, but keep in mind shortening can be measured in a dry measuring cup. Ooh. You want to cut it to the size of a pea. So cut the fat to the size of the pea. And basically, just like in the biscuit method, we're cutting the fat into our baked good, and little bits of fat are getting coated with flour, and eventually as that fat melts away, it's left us with nice flaky layers. You know what else a pastry blender is good for? Crushing bones. Have you guys ever tried it? It's very cathartic. Okay, so then you can see it kind of looks like coarse crumbs. This is where we want to be at. We don't want to go much smaller than that, but you can't really see it, but it should resemble coarse crumbs. So now I've got my liquid or my dry here, and now I need to move on to my liquids. Now, for my liquids, it tells me that I need 50 mils of cold water. I always measure a little bit extra because I always tend to need a little extra. So I'm going to measure just over 1/4 cup. Now the key with pastry is that everything needs to be cold, cold, and colder. So you want to use cold water. You want to use cold shortening. You want to use everything as cold as you can get it to stop the fat or to keep the fat from melting. Which also indicates that we want to use our hands as little as possible when we work with pastry. Now, personally, I think 1 egg is too much for the amount of shortening that we have here. I use 1 egg in 5 cups of flour with a whole pound of shortening at home. So in your recipe, it does say use 1 egg. I would say let's cut your egg in half. So crack it into a cup, measure out 30 mils. Let's use 2 tablespoons. So I'm going to crack mine into a cup. Great. Throw it to the garbage. I'm going to use this fork for many jobs. Your fork is like a great tool for your pastry. Okay. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons. Okay, well, it made a different choice. That's fine. That's roughly 2 tablespoons, more or less. And the other thing that most pastry recipes have in them is vinegar. And you're going to see that I added a little tiny thing of vinegar just for us when we do pastries. And make sure you sanitize the outside of that container too. We do need 5 mils of vinegar. And the vinegar just pumps up the activity of that baking powder, which is a really small amount, but you need it to kind of activate things. And I put my vinegar right in with my egg and my water mixture, and it kind of makes this weird swamp water business. And you're like, well, that kind of smells weird. We'll be fine. Everything will be fine. So I'm going to put this over here. Now, what I'm going to do is, the key is, number 1, keep a clean working space. So everything I'm not using or I'm finished with, I put into my sink so it's soaking and sanitizing while I'm going to work with this. Now, you want to sprinkle your liquids in. You never want to dump them all because we might not need them all. And if you don't need them all, then don't use them all. And if you need a little more water because it's a little dry, that's okay. Just get a little bit more, sprinkle it only in the spots that you need it, but not all over the dough. Okay? So I'm going to sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle. And then I just toss from the outside to the inside. Toss together. Okay? Sprinkle, sprinkle, toss, toss, toss. Toss it together. Okay, and then we give it another little sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle in multiple locations, not just straight out in the center. Toss it together. Okay. Okay, toss it together. Okay, and I can see that this part over here is more dry than this part over here. So I'm just going to sprinkle it on the dry parts, not on the part that's already moistened. And I'm going to sprinkle and toss together again. Okay, so then I'm just going to give it a feel. Okay, it feels pretty soft to me, and you do not want to knead this like a yeast bread. You want to just use your hands and basically press it together enough, Jada, to bring the dough together. Okay, so I'm gonna just pour this right here. I'm gonna get rid of my bowl. Now, anytime you're using a pie plate or muffin tins for pastry, pastry has so much fat in it that you never need to prepare your pan, right? It's not gonna stick because of the nature of how pastry is made. It looks pretty crumbly and you're gonna be like, Miss Kate, how am I gonna roll this out? But you can see it's pretty soft, it's moldable, okay? So you just wanna bring it together. You don't wanna touch it too much. And usually with pastry, like you can see, it's kind of just barely together. You just wanna touch it enough times to kind of bring the dough together. And then after you touch it, I would refrigerate it. Like at home, I'd refrigerate it for at least over an hour, like at minimum. I mean, here, I would just wrap it, but you can see it's come together. It's a nice little circle. We're looking really good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let you guys go make your pastry. We're gonna wrap it up, we'll refrigerate it, then we'll come back for the next part of the demo for the actual pumpkin filling, okay?